You wanna know if you're to blame, babe. They did you wrong and turned you smart.
Slam poetry, or we also call it spoken word, is basically a way of expressing yourself, a way of telling stories. That's the simplest way to say it. It's storytelling. And it's actually I think it's a very democratic art form in that way, because everyone has a story to tell. So as opposed to the more literature version of poetry that can sometimes seem inaccessible or only for, educated crowds or who have a certain level of study, slam poetry is really poetry of the people, poetry for everyone. Slam poetry in the United States is pretty popular in some circles, usually in large cities. Almost every large major city in the U.S. has its own slam poetry scene for adults. But what's not as common in every city is the youth slam poetry. So that's a lot of what Young Chicago Authors works to do, is bring young people and get them involved in spoken word, starting with the schools. And so I'd say it's growing. It's pretty big, but it's still growing and growing to be more rooted in the community, as opposed to just something that a small group of people in the city do. One poet that inspires me her name is Patricia Smith, and she's a woman who's from Chicago. She grew up in a neighborhood on the west side, and she writes a lot about her experience in Chicago, her experience being a woman of color, and I like her because she has become very popular in the literary poetry crowds. Like, her books win awards, and she's a widely published author, but she's also a brilliant performer. And when you see her, she really takes a hold of you, and it's really captivating, and her work is very powerful. So she's probably one of my role models in writing and performance.
Halloween trick or Groucho Marx smash. What one of his past this.
Some of the differences between slam poetry and rap are that I think slam poetry is birthed out of hip-hop culture, and so rap is the oral poetic element of hip-hop culture. And from the battles of the early days of rapping or hip-hop music, you have the idea for slam poetry. But all of this is really kind of ancient forms of oration and storytelling, back to the time when we used to sit around a fire and stand up and tell the history of the people, or tell what was going on of that day, or the weather, or coming events, or walkabouts and indigenous traditions. I think that slam has in some ways opened up its form. I mean, rap is something done over a beat, and slam allows for many voices and many kinds of poems. So it doesn't always have to rhyme. It could be about many spectrums and walks of experience. And but I think that slam has a real debt to hip-hop culture. In Chicago, we organize a festival called Louder Than a Bomb, the Chicago Youth Poetry Festival, and we put spoken word, hip-hop poetry, slam poetry in the center of the classroom, and use it to re-engage young people in their own process of education, and then do the work of creating the tool of spoken word to have a larger manifestation of doing the work of community organizing. And so we bring together young people across every imaginable border in Chicago, across lines of race and socioeconomic and religious and ethnic status, and have them commune with and talk with one another. Well, yeah, this trip has been amazing. We've had the opportunity to go to Barcelona and Valencia and Madrid, and it's really exciting what's happening in this country. It's exciting in terms of, I think, a lot of the culture, but the spoken word and the slam poetry scene seems to be growing. It's young. I think that I think in some ways there's no ceiling. There's no limit to what is possible. I was really inspired by the poets that we met, the educators that we met, and to have the opportunity to get to work in classrooms around the country was amazing. And it proves this idea that I think we have in Chicago, that regardless of where you are, young people have a lot to contribute to public discourse. They have a lot to say about the world in which they inherit and which they inhabit. And I think ultimately the voices and stories of young people can really do a lot to change the way a city operates, to change the way a state and country operates, and hopefully make the world a better place.